Hi, everyone, and welcome to this presentation. My name is Dr. Louis Amador, and I serve as the Dean of Student Equity and Success at Cerritos College. And one of the areas that I oversee is our Veterans Resource Center. But prior to working at Cerritos, I'd also served as the director of the Veterans Resource Center, both at Cal State Fullerton and at Cal State Dominguez Hills. So I do have quite a bit of direct working experience in terms of serving this population. Today's presentation is entitled Student Equity and Success, Supporting Student Veterans from an Equity-Minded Framework. The presentation goals include being able to provide you some background and context for the student equity plans and the initiative itself in the California Community College, developing an understanding of the veteran experience from an equity-minded framework, and identifying equity-minded strategies for supporting student veterans. Before I begin, I want to share a quote that I think really sums up kind of the role that we play as educators in regards to equity and closing equity gaps. And that is from Alexander Denaire, who stated, "When a flower doesn't bloom, you fix the environment in which it grows and not the flower." So gone are the days that we are pressed to ask students the critical question, are they college ready? And really reposition the issue to, are we student ready? Can we meet students where they're at? Can we better understand their specific needs and how we can address them? You all may have seen this illustration in the past. It's one that gets used quite a bit in terms of kind of illustrating the distinction between equality and equity and why we choose to use equity as the framework to better understand disparities amongst our different populations. And as you can see in the illustration, having all things equal in terms of resources and the distribution of those resources don't always provide the intended outcome that you would hope. That some people within that equal distribution of resources is still going to come short in terms of being able to access everything that they need to be able to achieve their educational goals. And so with equity, it takes into account those disadvantages or the things that challenge students and realigns the distribution of resources in a way that makes more sense so that everybody is successful in achieving those goals. And then the final pane, liberation, really is more about just doing away with the fence altogether so that everyone has equal access to their education. And for its part, I can certainly appreciate this illustration. Like I said, it's a really popular one. But there are those who have been critical of it in terms of not wanting to see education as a game or positioning people who are pursuing their education as spectators of their goals, but really as vibrant, active participants in trying to achieve, bettering themselves. And so there is another illustration that or set of illustrations that I want to share, and it is really taken from, I have to give credit to the Center for Urban Education at USC in terms of its concept. They developed their own illustrations, but for the purposes of copyright, I've redesigned it, in terms of a different analogy that I think still meets the point that I'm trying to make about the distinction between equality and equity. And so I'm using, instead of a sport or a game, really this idea of a pathway or an academic journey, and that all things equal, everybody would start at the exact same point in that journey, all striving for the same goals, and all experiencing the same type of path or journey that, in terms of that pursuit. But what we know is that that's not always the case, that students don't all start at the same point. Some students have more advantages than others and are provided with some supports that really lend themselves to moving them further along in their academic journey in comparison to others. And this can include scholarships having educated parents who can help guide them in the pursuit of their education. Um, a side story of this is, I've worked in the field for over 26 years now, and I have a son who's a junior in high school. And I know that he is privileged. I know that he has the benefit of having parents who have gone to college, who can help discuss and help him navigate all of the things that he needs to begin considering in terms of the types of decisions he wants to make about his education moving forward. Everything from the type of college he wants to go to the type of major he wants to pursue, and all the different considerations involving those types of decisions. Other resources include academic tutors, being able to supplement the education that they may be getting from their classroom instruction, because that may not be enough to have them fully effective in achieving their goals, their academic goals. Having socioeconomic advantages certainly will align themselves to some of these things that are already, that are also on this list, including resource-rich schools, and having technology and the types of things that really will help elevate students' performance. Not all students have that experience in their high schools. Highly skilled teachers, honors and AP courses, and as well as an active social network and social capital that can help drive their, everything from their desire to wanting to go to school to knowing what steps they have to take in terms of making informed, effective decisions. On the other side of that spectrum, those who may be starting further back, maybe not even at the starting line, but even challenged further, include things like poorly funded schools, less skilled teachers, having a counselor ratio in their school of 1 to 1,000, meaning you're virtually going to have a counselor who is inaccessible because it's just beyond their capacity to really provide you with the hands-on support that you may need, as well as a truncated curriculum because of the lack of funding or the resources available to allow teachers and other educators to really invest and provide a comprehensive curriculum for these students. So we know that there are these challenges, and it creates the disparity that we're talking about in terms of an unequal playing field or an unequal journey for these students. Even more so, there are systemic and institutional disadvantages that some of our students will experience along the way once they actually get to college. They may actually, if they are students of color, they may be coming into a predominantly white campus or experience a predominantly marginalized racial ethnic experience on that campus. They may also be experiencing microaggressions or implicit bias, as well as disproportionate remediation that is really focused on very specific populations on the campus that really challenge a student's ability to complete that educational journey in a timely fashion or in an effective one. So we recognize that these things exist, and through student equity, there are things that we need to do about that. Now, one aspect or approach that institutional educational systems have taken is to diversify the student population. And this in and of itself is not a bad thing. In fact, I would encourage where schools may be predominantly one ethnic group versus another, one racial group over another, to really take a look at that and diversify the population, because that'll just enrich the overall experience for everyone. And it goes without saying that I would be a proponent also of the fact that you would need to make faculty, staff, and your leadership representative of the faces that they are serving as well. But we know that just adding more students into an already broken or troubled journey is only gonna take us so far. In fact, it's gonna, have those additional students basically experiencing the same thing as the other student who is already on that journey in terms of an unequal pathway. And so more needs to be done. And we definitely have a role to play, and hearkening back to Alexander Nenayer's quote about changing the environment is really the call for us to have a role in student equity. So our role is really to be those kind of road workers, to fill up those potholes and to remove the educational barriers that often will hinder, if not prevent outright, students from accomplishing and achieving their goals. This includes goal setting and action planning, regular data disaggregation and analysis so that we better understand the circumstances and the types of data points, momentum points that exist that will allow us to strategize and come up with viable solutions to addressing these gaps. Inquiry to understand how practices impede equity. It isn't enough to just know what the outcomes are. We need to know why these things are happening. And separating or distinguishing the difference between, when we're looking at data, looking at things like leading and lagging indicators, and not just focusing on the lagging ones around, outcomes of graduation and completion, but along that journey, looking at some of the leading indicators around retention and persistence that allow educators to make adjustments along the way so that students who are already in that journey can benefit from the types of changes, systemic changes that need to happen. Finally, faculty staff training to be equity facilitators themselves, that our academic leaders, VPs and presidents and superintendents can't be the only ones doing this, so that it really needs to be kind of an all hands on deck in moving the needle for closing equity gaps for our disproportionately impacted students. In order to do that, the system has identified two, I think, really promising plans that have been directed specifically towards closing some of these gaps. One is the Student Equity Plan, which was initiated a few years back, which I'll talk about in some detail, and then also the Vision for Success. The equity plan really aligns itself with 5 success indicators, including access, course completion, ESL and basic skills completion, degree and certificate completion, and transfer. And in order to understand how we're doing in those indicators, they disaggregate by subgroups, including gender, ethnicity, age, disability status, and economically disadvantaged. When we recognize that not all our students are the same and not all of them experience the same things, by disaggregating the data, we can better identify those students who need the most help. Our core commitments within the Vision for Success starts with increasing credential attainment goals by 20%, increasing our transfer goals by 35% to the UCs and the CSUs, decreasing unit attainment for a degree, increasing employment for CTE students, reducing and erasing equity gaps, as well as reducing regional gaps. The core commitments themselves include focusing on students' goals, designing and deciding with the student in mind, pairing high expectations with high support, evidence-based decisions, owning student performance as our own obligation, enabling innovation and action, and then cross-system partnership. So both the equity plan and the Vision for Success are things that all of our institutions are pledging to focus on and work on. And this is really for all students who may be experiencing these gaps. Now I want to kind of shift over to our specific population, which is our veteran students. So equity considerations for veterans are not unlike some of the other groups who are experiencing these equity gaps. There's quite a few similarities that they are experiencing, and partly because they are also members of those other populations themselves. Our student veterans are often experiencing things like isolation, merging identities and intersectionality, stigmatization and implicit bias, challenges with seeking support, socioeconomic challenges, and cultural capital and institutional habitus. And I'll break some of this down one at a time. With regards to isolation, what we're seeing is quite a few veterans who may be longing for the type of camaraderie and connection that they had in the military once they are out. It's often hard for them to relate to their civilian counterparts. And it's why we have veterans resource centers, and why they're so important is because they create and foster an environment that is really conducive to the types of social connections that our student veterans are often seeking. Merging identities and intersectionality is, like I mentioned, we have so many of our student veterans who come from other identity groups, be it being students of color or, being identifying as female. These groups themselves are experiencing disproportionate impact in very specific ways. And so experiencing a duality in terms of their identities complicates things even further for a lot of our veterans. The stigmatization and implicit bias that they experience on campus isn't isolated to just other students. They sometimes often experience this in the classroom, either in terms of how their professors may view them, because they've got their own assumptions about someone who served in the military, or just things that they have heard about veterans. When I worked at another institution, I once actually got a call from the campus police because a faculty member had reported that a student had disclosed that they were a veteran, and that faculty member was afraid that the student may somehow experience post-traumatic stress disorder and cause harm either to themselves or to somebody else in the classroom. There was no evidence of this. It's not like the student actually exhibited any of that behavior, but because of the type of stigmatization that was out there around veterans and some of the mental health challenges that you may see in the media being portrayed, that particular student was isolated in terms of potentially being a risk to the safety of others. And so our veterans sometimes are really challenged by how people view them and see them on campus. We also have veterans who may find it very, very difficult because of the acculturation that they experience in the military, with seeking support when they are experiencing some challenges. I know, when I served, and I didn't disclose earlier, but I am a veteran of the United States Marine Corps. When I went back to school, there were, I can remember specific moments where it would have been very easy for me to just go to a learning resource center or seek out an academic tutor, but because of being so mission driven and really taking a great deal of pride in being able to do what I set myself out to do, it was often very difficult for me to admit that I might need some assistance or help. For some, that may be a sign of weakness. When I was pursuing my doctorate, my research was really focused on young men of color. And what I found very similar to our veterans was that they grew up in an environment where you would be seen as weak if you sought out help for things that you were tasked with trying to accomplish or achieve. And so we need to do our part in terms of recognizing that this may be a dynamic or a factor in how our student veterans are navigating challenges on a campus. Socioeconomic challenges. We have a lot of our veterans who are head or single parents, head of household or single parents. And so in addition to trying to achieve their academic goals, they may also be very worried about, putting food on the table and making ends meet. And certainly challenges around housing or food insecurities is something that is not lost on our student veteran population. And then cultural capital and institutional habitus is really that ability to navigate. We have a lot of student veterans who are first generation. And so similar to that illustration of an unequal starting point, our veterans may not necessarily have the cultural capital or understanding of the written and unwritten rules around what it means to be a college student, and how to operate effectively in an a college university environment, may really strain their ability to fully be engaged and embrace that academic journey. So what can we do in terms of supporting veterans from an equity-minded lens? Well, I've got a list and I'm going to illustrate them, but you may find them to be very, very familiar. Those of you who are already working and supporting veterans, either through a Veterans Resource Center or as an academic counselor, may already be employing a lot of these techniques with veterans. And that's not a surprise. A lot of the types of wraparound services or systems of support that they really push in terms of closing equity gaps for all students are very much true also for veterans. So one is this idea of early engagement. As I said, our student veterans may be experiencing some challenges around being able to navigate a campus or a new environment. And if they're experiencing that, they're likely experiencing that sense of isolation. And so the sooner we connect with them, and allow them to be aware of the types of resources we can provide and how we can serve as support to them, the better off they'll be in terms of wanting to invest in their education and actually taking advantage of the resources that we present to them. Offering transitional support because of everything I just indicated, whether it's an orientation that is customized for our veterans, or it's reaching out to them as part of that early engagement with specific strategies or support services that really help them, in terms of their onboarding and transition from perhaps a military culture to now a student academic culture. Providing those wraparound services that I just mentioned, and those can include things like financial aid and financial assistance, the student health center, in order to offer medical attention or even mental health mental health concerns that they may be experiencing. Housing and food insecurities. A lot of the campuses already have these services in play. And so being able to establish working relationships where we can provide more than just a casual handoff, but really, working collaboratively with them in partnership so that when students are in need, these types of resources are at our fingertips and that we can provide them, many times as a one-stop shop through the Veterans Resource Center. Providing an environment that really ensures that students feel a sense of mattering and a sense of belonging. Again, students may be feeling really alienated as a result of not being able to relate to their civilian counterparts. Oftentimes our student veterans are much older. When I was returning to school as a recent veteran, and my major was political science, oftentimes we would be talking about a variety of different topics, and other students would share their perspectives or experiences that were oftentimes really just straight out of high school. Well, my experience was very different. I'd already lived a very specific life in the Marine Corps, and I was older and just had a different sensibility about myself, and found myself often like wondering, are there others who might be able to relate to what I'm going through? And so providing a community that embraces our student veterans and the experiences that they bring can really go a long way. Being able to leverage the types of strengths that they may bring, and not focusing so much on deficit, but really an anti-deficit asset-based approach in terms of how we support our students can also be of tremendous positive outcome for the student. When I worked at another institution, again, as an example, we were partnering with our Career Center to basically provide ambassadors who could help support other students in terms of being more prepared for the job market, and all of the different things around career preparation. And they sought out our student veteran population directly because they knew that our veterans had already experienced a high level of professionalism, an environment where they themselves were leaders. These are things that we should embrace and take account of, and really focus on, so that we can empower students in their self-efficacy and their ability to serve as leaders amongst their peers and with others on campus. When we do all of these different things, our students are more inclined to be invested and engaged in their education. They're more inclined to attend class and to strive to do well in their courses. So these are the types of things that I think so many of us already aspire to do, but that they also really address the types of equity gaps that I've been discussing. So I want to leave off with a story that I have shared with others within my division and with the rest of the campus at Cerritos College in trying to encourage and bring others on board in terms of the role we all have to play in closing equity gaps. And it's the story of John F. Kennedy and the janitor. Some of you may have already heard this story. But in the early 60s, we were, as many of you know, in the middle of the Cold War. And part of that Cold War tension was really around the space race. The Soviet Union had already beat us to being the first in outer space, sending someone out into space. And so John F. Kennedy really pushed our country to be the first to be to place someone on the moon. And so a lot of resources were directed towards NASA to ensure that this actually became the outcome. And he was so invested that in 1962, John F. Kennedy actually went to NASA to visit the facility to see, to get an update and see how things were progressing in terms of that mission to get someone on the moon. While he was there, he came across a custodial staff member who was, as the story goes, was sweeping a hallway. And so John F. Kennedy introduced himself to the custodial staff member and asked the staff member, what are you doing here? Or what is it that you do? And the custodial staff member basically looked at the president and simply said, I'm helping to put a man on the moon. That custodial staff member knew that his role still played a vital part in achieving the overall mission. That by providing a clean facility and an environment that was conducive to the types of critical thinking and learning and preparing and planning for everybody else in that facility, he was lending and contributing to the overall goal. And I share this story because we may have staff members who may not have the benefit or the luxury of seeing the fruits of their labor directly with the student. They may not even be front facing with students. They may be in a cubicle, or they may be in front of a screen all day, looking at at data or running reports or focusing on processes that that support veterans, and that's okay. But we can't have them lose sight of the fact that all of that still contributes to the goals of supporting and helping students to graduate in a manner that is conducive to their timeline, as well as in terms of achieving their specific goals. Um, Sometimes it's hard for them to recognize that, and so we have to be reminders of that we all have a role to play, and that we all can help move that needle in terms of closing equity gaps. So that actually concludes my presentation. I believe that we are going to make some time for some questions at this point. So I want to thank you for allowing me to share a little bit about what it is I do, and kind of the ways in which equity can really play a vital role in supporting our student veteran population. Thank you.